Morning, Justin. How are you?
I'm very good, Deirdre. How are you?
Oh, I'm great, thanks. Yeah. Really liked your post the other day, um,
Thanks.
where you were talking about worry.
Yeah, I think it's my feeling on worry is it's kind of an old word, and
Mm,
it's an older reflection, and I think as well, one thing I notice more and more is that a lot of, shall we say, middle-aged people and above have a disconnect in trying to understand anxiety when it comes to younger people and
mm,
millennials as a generation
mm,
in a work context. And a lot of the times when I'm working with younger people, and recently I was working with a 28-year-old who had some real issues in terms of anxiety and worry, and there was some challenges around history of self harm,
mm,
and a very difficult period living overseas, and parents not being able to connect to the reality of his emotional needs because of
mm,
he's talking in this context of anxiety. And one of the things that struck me was that if we can open up this conversation more around worrying, because
mm,
everybody is worrying. Sometimes people might say to me, well, I don't suffer from anxiety. I don't have any particular issues around anxiety, but worrying is something that everybody does. And
mm,
I was mentioning to you before, there's a fantastic book written by Dale Carnegie, who is the author of How to Make Friends and Influence People. But he also wrote a manual around how to stop worrying and start living. And it's actually, for anybody who studied NLP, it's kind of like a precursor to NLP, because if you listen to the audiobook, it is actually programming your mind as you listen to it.
Okay. You will stop worrying whether you want to or not.
Yeah, well, you will, but also he just creates very simple ways for us to orientate our understanding of worry, and then to have tools to improve upon that. And that's like with the post on LinkedIn talking about JD Rockefeller, who everybody knows as the wealthiest man on the planet, and even to this day, in comparison to Elon Musk, Rockefeller would still be wealthier. However, he came from nothing, built an extraordinary level of wealth to the point that he was making $1 million a week, um, and at the age of 40, he had alopecia, and all of his bodily hair fell out. He had
Mm,
chronic stomach ulcers, was in chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and for all intents and purposes, his physician thought he was dying.
mm,
And the lead up to that was Rockefeller was absolutely focused with stellar focus on every single transaction in his business. And the stupidity of how bad that got was that there was a transaction underway where they were transporting a large amount of resources up a river, and the consignment was worth in the order of 300,000 euros, and there was a storm coming in, and Rockefeller had got onto one of his lieutenants and said, at the 11th hour, I think we should try and ensure that now, because the chances are if the storm hits us, we're going to lose the consignment. So the lieutenant went off to try and ensure it, but it was out of hours, and it was unlikely to be done. But anyway, the lieutenant pulled it off and insured it, and it cost at that stage $150 to insure this 400,000 of raw materials that were being shipped.
mhm,
The storm passed and it wasn't a problem. And Rockefeller famously took to bed for the better part of 2 weeks because he'd miscalculated and wasted $150 on an insurance policy that was not needed. Yet
oh my gosh.
he was making $1 million a week, which is an astronomical amount of money in today's terms. But that was his default position. All I
Mm,
understand is drive, 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 push, 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 and worry and over worry, and then get
mm.
consumed by worry. And then that all consumption means that I stop living.
Yeah, it's it's absolutely fascinating that somebody can, on the one hand, have so much in terms of resource and so much in terms of security, but still be worried about, still be living under the shadow of loss, still be living with that amount of fear in their lives. And that, my dad he always said, worry will kill you. And that apparently was his reason for not doing it. Now, I mean, he might have done that to excess. not going to go into that. But it's just, yeah, it's like when we are worry and fear, worry, fear, anxiety, all of these things, they are keeping us in this energy of not being able to, I guess, see positive possibility.
Absolutely. And what I find in terms of, if you look at this in the context of leadership and executive leadership, okay, if we let's look at Rockefeller. So he's 2 weeks in bed, okay, and he's worried because of that transaction. What was missed in terms of the opportunities of his life during those 2 weeks? Yeah. So if we're more able to see that worry is an absolute detriment, so its focus is going to diminish in terms of our capacity to be present to our lives, then we will have lost opportunities. And we know, like from the neuroscience side of things, that you lose 60% of your prefrontal cortex cognition when you're trapped in the fear state. So worrying is the fear state. So you're not actually present to what's going on. And a good way to try and understand this is that when we're in our prefrontal cortex, when we're 100% engaged in our own cognition, and we're in flow state, in essence, it's like being, 5 or 6 rows back in the cinema with a nice comfy seat, a nice box of popcorn, your favorite drink, and you're watching the movie of your life in phenomenal stereo. And then when you start to worry and you lose that prefrontal cortex and you move into the fear center, it's like being sucked out of that cinema. And now you're outside the cinema trying to peer in through a slightly opaque window and listen to what's going on. You can still see and hear, but your capacity to be really present to the experience is much less. And that's what worry does to our minds. So of course, performance drops.
Yeah. And we've, I mean, again, back to that thing of the worrying and the default mode network in the brain as well, which does keep us running back and forth, either worrying about things that haven't happened or regretting things that have. And then because of that flip switch nature of the default mode network and the task positive network, the fact when we do something concrete, when we take action, when we are doing the things that, whether it's knitting or whether it's helping someone or whether it is, focusing on the task at hand, then that also can quiet the worry in our minds. That can alleviate that that fearful, stressed, anxious position that we get into.
Yeah, it can. And I think, it's simple levels of action. Okay. So like that, if you feel worried and overwhelmed, start with write everything down. So write everything down on a piece of paper and go, okay, here's all the things I'm worried about. And then take out the next piece of paper and split that in 2. Things that I have influence and control over, things that I can't influence and control. So you'll find then there's a whole bunch of stuff like I'm worried about the economy, inflation, the war, COVID. So these things are not really for me. And now I'm left with things that I can take action and where I can actually implement change. And then within that new group, start with prioritizing what is effective use of my time. So now I have a list of 5 things that I can actually influence. Now look at where does my attention need to move to quickly? Where are my quick wins? Where can I actually get some positive feedback into my brain? Because then you'll start to feel happier and healthier and life will just become a bit easier. But don't leave it all in here.
No.
Get it out.
And also, like we were talking about earlier, that we need to notice what changes we're making to see what impact those changes have. Because the inverse of that, and I have seen this as well with so many people, is that over time, they erode their own support, their own kind of body budget, their own support systems, because life gets busy, because they have more responsibilities, because, you know, they're running kids here, there, and everywhere, because they're trying to keep up with paperwork, because, you know, 3 people are off this week at work and they need to take on more. And the things that keep them happy and healthy and that help with, you know, keeping the worries and the anxieties at bay aren't there. But they, you know, they think, oh, well, it's only this week, I'll get back to it. But then something else happens and it slips and it slips further. So the exercise might be gone, or the connections with friends might be gone, or the healthy eating might be gone. And we just don't always notice the insidious creeping of these things and the damage that it's doing until it's quite late in the day.
Absolutely. And so if you look at, you know, Eastern philosophy and Eastern psychology is all built around helping one understand an awareness of self. So in a big part of Eastern philosophy is to create this ever-present witness to your own life. So here I am living my life, but I also want to have my witness that's here looking at me living my life, so that when something changes, when I'm feeling discombobulated, I have built enough in my life in terms of the tools and how I manage to maintain homeostasis to keep myself healthy, that I'm able to notice, look, you're not feeling as well as you were before. What's gone awry here? What's different compared to where we were 3 weeks ago and now? And I was sharing with you, you know, for me, I've got so many tools and so much that I focus on in terms of keeping myself healthy. But I started to feel anxious about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I haven't felt like that in years. And it was quite overwhelming to start worrying about stuff, like completely irrational stuff as well. And you know, knowing as much as I do in terms of the psychology and the neuroscience of behavior, I'm thinking, what's going wrong? So I have to kind of deconstruct my own bomb and figure out what's happening. But when I went back 6 or 7 weeks previously, I'd fractured my foot and I'm wearing a boot. I can't really walk very far, if not really just to my car, and you know, that's about the size of it. I can't run, I can't swim. So a huge part of how I maintain myself emotionally and physically is movement, is walking and being active, and that's gone. And in that not being there, a part of my well-being regime has lost. And I think this whole idea of wellness, well-being, you know, people are poo-pooing it and dismiss it at times, and it's like, it's all kind of new age woo-woo nonsense, right? But you know, these bodies, these human beings are living entities, and they need a little bit more than just a bit of watering and occasionally a bit of time in the sun, you know. So we have to kind of maintain the whole infrastructure, and that requires us to do a bunch of things. So if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, if you're starting to worry about stuff, if you're starting to feel like, you know, you're anxious, work backwards and think, well, okay, what was going on when I wasn't feeling like this? Write down all the things that you're worried about, and then identify, is there anything different between then and now? And if there is, re-implement it. So I just started walking again. Thankfully, the boot went off. I had phenomenal opportunity to reconnect with my cognitive functions when I was out walking back in nature and thinking, wow, this is what I like. This is where I remember how to be in flow and to be happy.
Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it? That people really need to be aware of this and actually not let the fact that they are in that worry state deter them from doing the things that will support a better mental state.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And the reality is, we always want complicated solutions to what we perceive to be complicated problems. But in reality, there's simple problems that require simple solutions. But until you break it down and spend some time with a piece of paper, or, you know, work with a coach, work with a third party who can help you understand yourself a bit better. But whether you can afford to have that, or whether or not you need to keep it basic, if you want to keep it basic, piece of paper, write down what's going on, A great resource for anybody is to read that book. The audio book is actually the best, because you really feel like you're immersed back in 1920, but you also get a great insight to realize that the same things that debilitated people in 1920 are the same things in 2022.
Yeah. People are people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Justin, that's been really interesting as always. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat with me. And for anybody who's heard anything there that you enjoyed, that you want to find out a bit more about, or if you want to connect with us, head on over to neurodevelopmentinstitute.com and see what we're up to, including our initiative to raise some funds for humanitarian relief in Ukraine and other places where it's needed.
Well, thanks, Deirdre. Great talking to you as always.